All right, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Jinhua Zhao, Professor of Cities Transportation at MIT. Welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum and designed by the MIT Mobility Initiative. Today, I'm really excited to have our own Jim Aloisi and Bhuvan Atluri to present their research on funding U.S. transportation needs in an electric post-gas tax world. Let me ask people maybe two thoughts to put them together, right? The first thought is, what finances American transportation infrastructure? You think all the possible instruments. The gas tax is the primary one for most states and the federal government. For states, that happens even centuries ago, and for the federal government, since the enactment of the Interstate Highway Act of 1956. The second question is that the major effort of the U.S. to decarbonize transportation system is to electrify all our cars. So these are two ideas. It turns out the two ideas, when you put them together, they are not compatible. While we're transitioning away from a fossil fuel-driven mobility and towards a hybrid or electric vehicle, the deficit between the funding needed to finance our infrastructure and the revenue we collected from gas tax will grow to reach untenable levels. In fact, if we are really successful electrifying all cars, which we really hope we do, the gas tax revenue could go to zero. So if US DOT is a for-profit company, now it probably should be in the crisis mode, right? So how do we replace the gas tax with a more efficient, fair, and stable mechanism to meet the transportation funding need? US Energy Foundation has supported research at MIT, led by Jim Aloisi and Bhuvan Atluri, to exactly answer this question. So today, I'm really glad to have Jim and Bhuvan report back to the findings through this research. Before I pass the forum to Jim and Bhuvan, I will reinforce the norm of this forum, which is everyone contributes one idea. I really want to insist on this point. You choose to spend 1 hour here, we'd like you to participate, right? Given we have so many people, we can't have everybody talk in the forum, but do put your thought in the chat, either in the form of a question or in the form of a comments. Before I start the presentation by Jim and Bhuvan, I do have two quick polls to just get people warm up a bit. So this is a very simple question. Jim and Bhuvan, can you see the question? Yeah, good. So do you own an electric vehicle? Yes, I do. Or I do not own an EV, but own a gas car, or I do not own a car at all. Jim, I'll make you a co-host. And Boo, I'll make you a co-host, already co-host, good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We can tell our audience is truly global by looking at the percentage of people who don't own a car. This is definitely not representative of the US.
Same, yeah. Bhuvan, can you control the poll? I somehow cannot control the poll anymore. Do you see the answer?
Yeah, I'm sharing the results.
Oh, you're sharing the result. Okay, I somehow in my side I cannot. Yeah. So everybody can see the result already. Okay, cool. Yeah. So the second question, quickly, is let me go back here. So do people see the result? The 11% on car, 50 EVs, 57 do not own an EV, 33 do not own a car. Okay, so that question is let me see what's going on here. Is the second poll launched? Go on.
I just launched it.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So that's about the Easy Pass, or if you're California, Fast Track, or any other digital payment system. Do you use that, or do you use cash payment, or I do not drive? Bhuvan, I cannot control it from my end, so please you control it from your side. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you share the result? I cannot share.
Yeah. I think, yeah, we are just reaching 80%. So I'm just ending the poll. Yeah, I've just shared.
Great. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you for the participation in the poll. Now let me pass the forum to Jim and Bhuvan. Thank you. Jim, please.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
All right. Let me play from start. So hi, everybody. I'm Jim Aloisi. As Jinhua mentioned, Bhuvan and I led a team of researchers to explore this topic of the transition to EVs and its effects on transportation funding. It had, in addition to what I'm doing at MIT these days, in a prior professional life, I was in the public sector and I was the state's transportation secretary for a while. And so I'm personally sort of very attuned to wondering about how we fund our transportation systems. And it occurred to us, and it occurred to our sponsor, the Energy Foundation, that as there's a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion, a lot of energy, a lot of government action around the transition to electric vehicle, that there really wasn't enough dialogue happening on the topic of what happens to the revenue side of the house. And so we thought we would explore that in this report. One thing I point out, if you go state by state, however this resolves itself, it's not a one-size-fits-all resolution. So various states depend in various ways on gas tax revenues to support their transportation needs. California, as you can see, is a state that depends quite heavily on the gas tax for its transportation needs. In contrast, states like Alaska and North Dakota rely a lot less on the gas tax. Every state relies on some portion of the gas tax. But as you can see in this chart, it's a mixed bag, and this will hit certain states more heavily than the others. I caution that the percent that you see is not the only thing you should pay attention to, because, for example, in Massachusetts, the number that you look at reflects an actual cash number, which is close these days to $1 billion. So this is significant revenue that states are going to have to replace as their fleets become more EV driven. I'm showing you this very complicated looking chart just to give you the Massachusetts sense of how sources and uses of transportation revenue fund our transportation system. Every state will have a different chart like this, but many states are as complex. And what you see at the top, this is a few years old, this data, but motor fuel taxes, which a few years ago were about $824 million, they go into something called the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, and the majority of that money then pays for debt service, right? So all of the bond issues that go into building the roads, repairing the bridges, and doing whatever we do with bond revenue, that's primarily what that gas tax revenue in Massachusetts is paying for, as well as some operating budget. And as you can see, just by a quick look at the chart, that's one of the biggest sources of revenue that's driving the Massachusetts transportation sector. What we know about the gas tax, what we know about transportation revenue across the board, is that what we're currently collecting is not enough for most states and for the federal government. In fact, in fiscal 2018, there were only 4 states in the whole country that raised enough money to cover their highway spending. And many states, mine included, have significant unfunded infrastructure modernization and improvement needs. At the federal level, we've looked at the instability of the Highway Trust Fund. The Highway Trust Fund came into being in the late 1950s as part of the Eisenhower Interstate Highway Bill. The Highway Trust Fund was the innovation, if you will, of that piece of legislation that basically said we're going to put a 3-cent at the time federal gas tax on the price of gasoline, and we're going to put it in a lockbox, and we're going to guarantee that we're going to spend that money only on federal aid highways. And it worked, right? In the United States, we certainly, that revenue and the Highway Trust Fund helped build a national interstate highway system in support of federal aid roadway system in the middle of the last century in a very impressive way, with the federal government for many decades providing 90% of the funding to states for the building of the interstate system. But what you can see in the chart is that at this point, highway trust fund accounts are not meeting demand on either the highway side or the transit side. And what we've seen, these are charts from our report, which Bhuvan, by the way, has put into the chat if you want to take a look at the full report. In this century, and since 2008, the federal government, the Congress, has had to consistently fill and replenish the gap in the Highway Trust Fund with hundreds of millions of dollars, because the current federal gas tax, which hasn't been raised since Bill Clinton was president, is simply not enough to meet our national needs. Now, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed by the Congress and signed by the president 2 years ago did include significant new revenue that has made the Highway Trust Fund solvent. And that solvency will continue for a period. But as you can see by this chart, that spend down period comes pretty quickly, so that by federal fiscal year 2028, not that far away, the Federal Highway Trust Fund will once again tip into deficit. So we know two things. We know that there's a national movement toward transitioning the light duty fleet and other fleets to electric. We know that electric vehicles pay no gas tax. And we also know that the gas tax today, without this federal infusion of money, is simply not adequate to meet our federal national needs or most state needs. And so we wondered what the key inflection point is where the price of an EV will be lower than the comparable internal combustion engine, because when that happens, most folks think that's when the adoption rates will begin to soar, right? There's a lot of debate about when that inflection point will happen. Obviously, a lot of factors go into that. If you look at this recent report that we saw, the United States, in terms of the light duty fleet, is looking at a transition maybe around 2026, an inflection point. SUV fleet, which frankly is becoming more and more of the fleet, 2026. So we don't know. This is not an if question. This is a when question. It's not about if this transition is going to happen. It's about when. And our report and my message has been, let's be prepared for that now. Let's start preparing for this now. If you look, we looked at certain states on a state-by-state basis. As an example, as I mentioned earlier, California depends on fuel tax for about 53% of its total. You see Texas, Massachusetts around 30, 27%, New York a lot less. So each state will depend differently on gas tax revenues. It doesn't mean that New York's 13% isn't a lot of money. It's a lot of money. But each state will have to find its own pathway to filling that gap as that gap gets larger and larger and larger. Many states already are imposing flat fees, mostly EV registration fees, as a simple, direct way to assess an EV for some of its costs associated with impacts, right? And so we've seen here, and Texas just adopted a new law to increase its flat fee. We see a variety of flat fees coming into play across the United States. One thing we're pretty sure of is that that won't be enough to fill the funding gap. Not only won't it be enough, but for it to be enough, you'd have to have a flat fee that I think politically would be untenable. So we looked at our framework, how did we look at this topic? First thing we looked at is what are your policy objectives, right? If you look on a state-by-state basis, are you looking for a dollar-for-dollar replacement of the gas tax? Is that what you only want to do? Or do you want to replace the lost gas tax and then add new revenue to fill those funding gaps that we know most states have? Do you want to use a new transportation revenue scheme to address traffic congestion, which is a big issue for many places? Do you want to find new revenues to fund sustainable non-automobile transport projects? Do you want to have a more sustainable approach to funding? Those policy objectives will inform how each state deals with replenishing the gas tax revenue. We looked at a report that came out of Harvard a few years ago about the cost, and this is Massachusetts data, cost of car ownership. And as you can see, there are many factors that go into the total cost of the car to the consumer, to the infrastructure. What we did on the right is we pulled out 5 factors that we thought if a state in this post-gas tax environment wanted to assess EVs for their impacts, what might be some factors that would be politically palatable and sort of manageable to think about? So we looked at capital outlay, maintenance backlog, debt service, operating as sort of key elements that perhaps if you pulled those out and you could recover those, that would be one way to think about replacing the gas tax. We looked at vehicle size because by definition, most of the automobile manufacturers in this country are building bigger and bigger vehicles. By definition, also, electric vehicles are heavier because batteries are heavier. Maybe they won't be heavier in 150 years, but right now they're heavier. All of that size, those additional weights are having impacts on a lot of automobility externalities, whether it's traffic safety, whether it's congestion, whether it's roadway maintenance, and particularly the emission of particulate matter, which we think is an issue that needs to get a little bit more attention. We also looked at as what are the sources, right? States, federal government can look at transportation sector sources or non-transportation sector sources, right? We did not take a granular look at non-transportation revenue sources, frankly, because the research indicates those are very politically unpopular things to do. Raising things like sales tax, income tax are generally avoided at the political level, so we don't see them as realistic. You also are sharing and competing with many other worthy societal needs when you are trying to extract funding from those sources. So we looked at transportation sources, right? And we looked at 2 ways. How would you think about this problem? You would think about it as, do I assess the ownership of the vehicle? Do I assess the use of the vehicle? Or maybe I do both, right? And we looked at each of those potential ways to extract revenue from transportation sector, and then we analyze them in a particular way. So we used this sort of multi-dimensional process. We looked at the method, as I just said, assess ownership, assess use. We looked at the instruments for raising the revenue. What would the instruments be? Would it be a vehicle miles traveled instrument? Would it be a road user charging instrument? Would the instrument be pricing at the point of charging? Would the instrument be parking? Would it be some other? Then how would you implement? What would the tools be that you would take into account that would implement those? And we looked at that in terms of vehicle typology, in terms of whether you wanted to have, as a state, an impact on time, on space, in terms of traffic congestion. So lots of different ways to parse this out. We assessed each tool through a performance lens. We had 4 key metrics, and through an efficiency lens, and I'll go through that really quickly. These are charts from the report, which you can look at, where we assessed each of the implementation tools and instrument tools. I'm watching the clock, and I apologize, I'm going too slow. Our performance lens looked at 4 key metrics, and we looked at each potential alternative against the gas tax as the norm. Is it easy to administer? Is there a high potential for evasion? Is it stable over time? And is it fair? And we use the word fair to include equity, but to be a little bit broader than that. And we assessed each potential alternative against those 4 performance metrics. I won't go through each because you can look at them in the report. We also looked at an efficiency lens. How efficient would an alternative be to dealing with some of the key externalities of automobility? Traffic congestion, impacts on the road, safety, and emissions. And we looked at both, not just carbon, obviously, but we looked at PM 2.5. And you can see in the report how we made that work. We did not make specific recommendations because that was not our purpose. What we did was provide people with a report that we hope will be a toolkit for policymakers, for advocates, for others to use as we have this national discussion about how we're going to replace the gas tax. I'm going to, because of time, I'm going to move to Bhuvan, who developed a dynamic model as part of our report that enables people to actively use it as an interactive toolkit as they're thinking about the post-gas tax funding environment. So Bhuvan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. I hope people can see my screen.
It's coming.
Okay. Anyway, so while the screen is coming, I'll probably just, yeah, not yet.
It's here. Got
Yep, we have it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So
I think we lost them.
Did we lose Bhuvan?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Hello, I
Right.
received a notice that Zoom quit unexpectedly, perhaps.
Yeah,
Zoom quit.
that's right. I see that. Hopefully he will log on back soon. Maybe Jim, let's start with some conversation on this topic.
Sure.
That let's see, Bhuvan.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can see
Yeah.
you. Okay, great.
Oh no, I think I got muted by mistake.
Oh, really?
But-
Yeah.
I'll add you back to the. Go ahead, Bhuvan.
Yeah, I'm just sharing screen again. Sorry about that.
Yeah, let me emphasize. I invite everyone to add your comments or question to the chat.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
It
Coming.
looks like it's.
Oh.
I'm wondering if your slides had something to do with kicking you out of Zoom. Are they very heavy?
No, not at all.
If not, I can share from my end if that helps. It's still not coming.
Let me just try one last time because I made a few changes.
Oh, you know, a few minutes. Okay. Yeah, now I stop my. Go ahead with yours.
May I ask Jim a question?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
My name is
Sure,
Eric
please
Hill.
do.
I'm with the NPO for the Orlando Urbanized Area, Metro Plan Orlando. There are several pilot programs across the United States in various states. I think Utah is the state that has gone the furthest with a VMT type scheme, if you will. How are those all faring? I mean, any of those doing well, or are they doing worse than the other, or similar results?
So Oregon has been sort of a national leader in VMT, and I think they are probably still the leader in this. The issue that we've confronted with VMT is that it makes people nervous. And it makes people, doesn't make everybody nervous, doesn't make me nervous, but it makes a lot of people nervous because people are worried that states could use it to track their origins and destinations. What Oregon has proved is that you can set up the technology so that you don't do that, and you basically treat this as going in once a year to get your car inspected, and I can read virtually your odometer, correct? But there needs, if you look at polling on VMT, it always polls badly, which is not good for the political world, right? Because people have a misperception of what VMT means. Once we're able to prove and demonstrate to people that we can use it simply like an odometer reading, and that we don't need, now as a transportation planner, obviously you'd like to have origin and destination data, but we're not going to be able, I think, politically to win that battle. And so one thing I'll just point out, then I'm going to leave this to Bhuvan. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there is a provision that directs the federal Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Buttigieg, to implement a national VMT pilot. Now, he hasn't done that yet, but he's directed in the bill to do that, as well as to deploy one or more road user charging pilots. Once the federal government actually does this, and I suspect that will happen after the election next year, I think that you'll see more of a sort of sophisticated exploration at the federal level of how a VMT can work and how it can work in a way that's politically acceptable, right? At the end of the day, it's, in my judgment, it's just nothing more than another way to price roads. And I think road pricing, road user charging of some form will more likely than not be the choice of most states and probably the federal government in terms of how they decide to replace gas tax revenue. Bhuvan, are you good?
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for the response, Jim.
You're welcome.
Right. So why we use system dynamics is because it lends itself really well to this.
I think what Bhuvan's just having
Lost
a
him
hard time.
again. Yeah.
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 All right. I'm still here I'm still the batter up at home plate. So just keep sending me your questions and I'll answer them.
Yeah, Jim, maybe I'll start one while Bhuvan is setting things up, and also encourage the audience to keep adding questions there, right? So 1 second. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So we'll have actually Bhuvan join me in my office now. Sorry for the glitches here. Let me do that. I'll just share this. Yeah. Right. Let's do this.
All right. Hopefully the transition will be smoother than this, but this is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So like I said, we need to model the fall in the stock, the number of IC vehicles in the fleet of personal cars in the US, and the rise of the EV vehicles, and how these interact with, the gas tax, the elasticities of people wanting to buy an EV if you are adding new taxes. And hence, we cannot look at variables independently. And obviously, we need a system perspective on the impacts of, policy, regulation, new policies that governments bring into forward, consumer behavior and choice through elasticities of these various taxes and new regulations, industry challenges in terms of, what is the actual capacity of the EV manufacturing lines at Detroit, and of course the environment. If global warming is it's really speeding up pace, then will people shift much faster? Obviously, some things are beyond the scope of this model. So, things like battery minerals availability, emissions impact. You can look at it, but, for the sake of, finishing the model, we didn't look at it. And, Excel, we always say this, Excel is always the second best tool for a task. If you want to do data analytics, yeah, you can use R, Julia, but you can also use Excel. And similarly, you can use Excel here as well. But given that there's so much circularity going in, the interdependency sort of limits and makes it unsuitable for Excel. And you can get around the circular reference error, but I think using system dynamics is much better. I'll skip this in the interest of time. I think there are larger experts of system dynamics on this call. But I'll just say that, it's a combination of reinforcing loops. Reinforcing loops, if desirable, create a virtuous cycle. And if undesirable, create a vicious cycle or a doom spiral that many people call. So something similar, easy would be like EV adopters, and EV adoption rate is a word of mouth cycle, which increases the adoption. And a balancing loop is something that nudges the system to stay in balance. And so something like, you have more EV adopters, but that reduces the availability of public chargers per EV, which then reduces the number of EV adopters. So it sort of keeps the system in balance. So this is a very simple example of how the model was designed. So yeah, so let's move on to the model. But one caveat, all models are wrong. That's the first thing we're taught at class in MIT, but some are useful. So hopefully the model that we created and have given as part of our report is a useful model. And I'm just going to skip this. This is all part of the report. The slides will be shared. Assumptions are taken from various references across, federal databases, state databases, and private consultancy reports. So you can go through these. Just to say that the year one in the simulation is 2023, and the simulation runs all the way for 27 years till 2050. So what is the, I think I saw Angie on the call. Shout out to Angie for helping me in creating the model. She's a PhD student here at MIT. So thanks, Angie. So top line, what the model tells us is it takes at least 15 to 17 years for the EV fleet market share to cross 50%. And mind you, most of this is driven by the 2035 mandate that, California and other states have said that you cannot sell an ICE car or a car with tailpipe emissions after 2035. This can change, and the model, you can dynamically edit this in the model, and I'll give you a brief snapshot of this later. This can be even slower if other states like, Texas say it's 2045 or 2050, then, the nation, it's much slower, this whole movement. So it may take 25 years as well. Reducing IC vehicles, and of course, increasing fuel efficiency standard means the gas tax will fall by half in 14 years. We have new fuel efficiency standards supposed to be implemented from 2032. So, we're going to lose at least 70% of it by 2050. And just as a top line, through most of an analysis, a VMT fee, like Jim said, not where you're traveling, but just how much you travel in a year or in a month. The frequency of billing can be edited around 2.9 cents. And of course, I saw a comment, all this has to be indexed to inflation. All this has to be, you can't just have a static fee because the federal gas tax has been stuck at 18.4 cents per gallon since 1993. So it's just lost 50% of its values compared to today. And some of the graphs, you can go through it, but just the point I was trying to make, that the ICE to EV transition, even with a 2.5 cent per mile EV VMT fee, takes over 15 years. Flat fees, a lot of people know this, but flat fees just do not work. If it's not even indexed to inflation, it will soon be outpaced by simple 2% inflation. It's not a consumption-based fee, does not scale well, and it's inherently unfair. So this is one thing that we've said. VMT fees perform better. You can, keep it up with inflation. It's consumption-based, and you can have slabs based on the vehicle size, typology, and weight. So just to summarize, so any new framework should treat the purchase ownership separately and the usage separately. I think Jim mentioned this point that, you know, we are hearing a lot of people complain that any EV VMT fee will deter people from buying an EV. But I think that's taxing the usage. Whereas we are saying you should still incentivize the purchase of a cleaner vehicle. It could be an EV, it could be in the future a hydrogen fuel cell car. But the usage of a vehicle, I mean, if you're using a 5,000 pound vehicle to move a 150 pound human, you have to price it correctly. Society should not be paying or discounting that price. So, you know, if it's 2.5 cents per mile or 25 cents per mile, that price should be paid by the person using that mode of transport, EV or no EV. And whatever the tax is, however it is designed, we understand it will be different for different states. You have to rightly price it for consumption. The person driving 5,000 miles in a Chevy Bolt should not be paying the same fee as a person driving 15,000 miles in an F-150 Lightning Platinum. It has to scale with usage. It should not be static, indexed to inflation, and increasing fleet efficiency. Overall, if cars become lighter, fingers crossed in the future, and more efficient, then you don't want your tax to suddenly start reducing in collections. You have to reward efficiency, lighter, smaller cars. Smaller EVs are being developed in Europe. We hope we get to see some of them in the US soon. You have to reward them, and you have to have levers to pass on benefits to enable an equitable implementation. We understand certain groups of people cannot help but travel by car. They might, because of gentrification, they might have had to move out to the suburbs and public transit is not good. They might have a commute they have to undertake every day. So you have to have levers to pass on the benefits to them. Do we have time to just show the model quickly, or let's see. So yeah. So we'll just give you a brief this. So I'm not going to share the back end of the model, but this is I just played around for a few hours and made a web interface, and it's just me. So please apologize, apologies for the 1995 graphics. So yeah, like I said, this is all dynamic. So if you move the lever, you can see how the collections are changing. So you on the left-hand side, you can set vehicle market and driving usage parameters, such as the lifetime of a car, the number of new car buyers, 16.7 million in the US annually, how many are first-time car buyers, and the lifetime of a car. Then you can set policy levers, such as the VMT fee, a flat fee, if you're doing a flat fee, a weight-based fee, if you're doing a weight-based fee, and what is the target year for 100% EV new car sales. We understand this metric can change, like Rishi Sunak in the US just changed this from 2030 to 2035. So suppose this becomes 2050, you can see the graph on the right changing. And similarly, you can see how that translates in how the EV market share also is then changing dynamically. You can change fleet fuel efficiency over here. What is the NHTSA proposal? Which year it will be implemented? And what's the actual ratio of fuel efficiency? So the fleet fuel efficiency changes. What is the gas tax per gallon in cents? 0.57 is volume weighted of federal gas tax plus state gas tax. If you're looking at a particular state, you can just change this to what state gas tax is and change your 2022 baseline to what your state's collections is, and accordingly just see what your deficit will be. And everybody loves Excel, so you can just download this into Excel and work and make your graphs in Excel and not have to use these janky looking graphs. Okay, so I think we'll stop now and just move to Q&A.
Cool. Yeah, see. Thank you, Bhuvan, first of all, for giving actually such a smooth presentation despite the technical glitch. And also thanks, Jim, for the first part of the presentation here. I'll start with two questions and then pass to John for the audience Q&A here, right? So first one is, most of this report really talk about how do we collect the money, right? But a system problem question is how do we spend the money, right? We know that there always be attention that we collect the money. How do we spend? How much do we spend on highway? How do we spend on transit? How do we spend on bicycle or the pedestrians, right? And while the resources dwindle, I worry that this tension will be even more exacerbated. This, right? So Jim and Bhuvan, I'd like to hear your thought on how do you think about this debate between the resource allocation once we collect the money will be. Jim,
so
please.
thanks, Jim. It's an important question that I like to make sure that we're all talking about. one of the things, as you know, that we're doing at MIT, we've got our Transit Research Consortium up and running, where we're working with 7 of the largest U.S. transit agencies on a variety of issues. And one of the things that we started up was a separate series of conversations among the CFOs and senior budget folks at each of these agencies. And we're doing that because, for the most part, most U.S. transit agencies are facing what you read in the paper or hear about, a fiscal cliff or a fiscal wall, as their COVID relief funding from the federal government begins to expire. And as ridership remains significantly, in most places, below 100% of pre-pandemic ridership levels, there's a significant operating budget gap that's emerging for each of these agencies. It's a serious gap. And these agencies need to fill that gap, or we're at risk of looking at reduced service levels or maybe higher fares, or both, neither of which are advisable. My point in saying this is, we know that the transit sector in the United States over the next several years will be needing new sources of revenue to replace the fare collection revenue that they were used to getting in the pre-pandemic environment. As long as ridership remains lower than it was, and it looks like it will plateau for a while. Obviously, there are a lot of influences there, including more people working hybrid, more people working from home, increased concerns about safety on transit, which I personally think are misplaced, but they are present in this nation, are going to keep ridership levels lower. As the transit agencies are dealing with this reality, now the highway lobby and states are going to be dealing with the concurrent reality of replenishing the gas tax. My message is that, from a sources and uses perspective, whatever the new sources are going to be, we really need to think carefully about the uses, because if we want to build a more sustainable and multimodal transportation platform in the United States, it's really important to get the uses right and to think about different ways of allocating transportation revenue that are being derived from new sources. This is a conversation, again, that each state will have separately, but it's an important one to have.
Great, thanks, Jim. My second question is this. There are 2 ways to look at the problem. One is, here's a very specific financial hole we're going to fill, right? Very practical. But the other way to look at it is, this is probably a best opportunity to change the transportation pricing and redesign it, right? Let me quote Professor William Wickery. He said the following in the 1960s. He says, I begin with the proposition that in no other major areas are pricing practice so irrational, so out of date, and so conducive to waste as in urban transportation. 50 years on, I don't think we are any better than his assessment said in 1960s. So therefore, can we use this opportunity that the EV electrification forces the debate, right? Because for a while, transportation planners, professionals have been called for the change of pricing structure to no avail. But now, given the fact that we have to redesign it, right? Can we design it in a much more rational and coherent way, as seeing this as an opportunity?
Well, and the answer is yes. And thank you for the question, and thank you for the inspiration, because it was your inspiration as we were thinking about this project at the very beginning that led us to include the efficiency lens assessment in the report. We were looking at the replacement of the gas tax initially from a performance perspective, right? Does it perform well? Is it stable? Will it give you the kind of revenue you need over time? But what we included was a different lens, this efficiency lens, which says, how good is the new revenue solution in terms of reducing particulate matter emissions? How good is it at reducing traffic congestion? How good is it at reducing impacts on road or improving safety? And when you look at it through that efficiency lens, which I think is kind of revolutionary, at least for most states in the United States, then you can use the revenue as a lever to improve the transportation experience for motorists, for non-motorists alike. You know, I continue to remind people that as we're moving to electric and we're dealing very effectively with tailpipe carbon emissions. We're not dealing as well with particulate matter emissions, and that despite people's thought that regenerative braking is the answer, which I don't think it is, the heavier vehicles will be producing more PM 2.5. And we know that this is a danger to public health, especially in urban environments, and particularly when there's a lot of braking going on because of traffic congestion, which also doesn't go away just because you swapped out your ICE vehicle for an EV. So using the revenue sources in strategic ways to build a more sustainable multimodal transportation platform is an opportunity moment that we have. So we don't look at this loss of revenue as a challenge, but more as an opportunity.
Thank you, Jim. Last question from me, and then give it to John. This is maybe a question to Bhuvan. So the gas tax, from the technology point of view, is really a low-tech instrument, right? It doesn't really require much real technology. But these days we have all sort of technology that's coming at us, right? Connected vehicle, GPS, RFID, QR code, blockchain. So how would the technology play a role in the future transportation pricing?
I think technology will definitely need to play a role in the future of transportation pricing, given that, we don't know where people are going to charge their cars, at home or end up using a public charger, and we cannot differentiate between using your dryer versus charging your car. So we need to be able to price the usage of the vehicle accurately. And technologies such as GPSF, RFID, QR code, definitely, these sort of things are needed. And I saw a couple of comments in the chat mentioning that, people have this perception that I don't want to share my data with the government on where I'm going, how much I'm traveling. Is there scope for an, NGO, non-governmental organization to move into this space? So one analogy rather that I'd like to make is GTFS, the organization which does the general transit feed specification. For those of y'all who are not aware, any transit app you use, Google Maps, and you check when the train is coming or where the bus is coming. This is all a feed, which is driven by GTFS. All the transit agencies across the world feed their data into this system, and various apps pull the data from this. So suppose we have a similar technology, a neutral open source company that has set up a feed specification, automotive travel feed specification, for want of a better name. And all the OEMs feed the data into this system. Almost all EVs are connected cars. Like any vehicle after 2016 or 17 is transmitting data back to the OEM. They have like a 5G chip modem in it, and they at least like basic data such as how much the car has traveled will be transmitted back to the automotive manufacturer, who can feed it into this transit feed specification, which can be secured by blockchain. And various so insurance companies tap into a certain aspect of it, how well you're driving, what is the steering angle, how hard you're braking, and your local government will just have access to a particular VIN number and how many kilometers has that car traveled, not where that car has traveled, but just how many kilometers in a particular period. And based on that, and based on the type of the car, and maybe for equity concerns, the income bracket that the car owner belongs to, a bill will be sent to you or accordingly.
Yeah, wonderful.
I think that's one.
Thank you, Bhuvan.
Yeah.
So John, let me give it to you for the Q&A from the audience. Please, John.
Yeah, you bet. Jim, Bhuvan, thanks so much for the presentation. We had quite a bit of comments, and we're definitely saving this chat file because there's really some interesting content and observations of things that are happening in many, many different parts of the world. So let me just start maybe with a question. I think Jinhua really touched on this with his opening question about, how do you spend the money? How can we sort of take advantage of this moment? Tom Walter said, look, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. How do we shift away from the automobile? And that generated a lot of comments in the chat. And I know we just touched on some of that, but I think the question maybe to ask is, do you see a sort of fundamental difference in the use case of where we use the automobile? So thinking of somebody who, drives a pickup truck in Montana versus somebody who, drives a an automobile in San Francisco. And I think the general question is, did that in any way sort of factor into your thinking as you did this work for the report?
Well, so I don't, not really, but I think, we were not looking at this report as a device to deter people from purchasing a vehicle, right? And I'm very much committed personally in my private life to some serious transit advocacy, but I never expressed that advocacy or my interest in sustainability as some people will, which is as a war on cars. I think that's a mistake, right? You don't win too many supporters when you engage in war. So I don't think about this as trying to prevent people from buying cars, but I do think that if we think carefully about how we use new revenue sources strategically, particularly through the efficiency lens that we have in the report, that we can reduce the use of automobiles, particularly in urban environments, right? And so to your point, it's not a one size fits all. Whatever's going to work in Wyoming or most places in Wyoming and most places in Montana is not going to work well in most places in California or Massachusetts. But in places like Massachusetts, we can make a difference, depending on how we use the money strategically, to mode shift people from, I believe, from car to transit or car to rail. That's going to take a fair amount of effort, because doing that is still pretty much a heavy political lift in many places in the country, including Massachusetts. John, if I could mention, I noticed the question, Amir and Ricardo were talking about, well, wait a minute, why are you so down in the report on the potential for parking?
Yeah, that was my next one.
To change. Well, first of all, what Paris is doing is great, but that's a city, not a state, right? And our focus looked at states, number one. Most cities in the United States are not really in a position where they are driving the transportation revenue discussion. So it's a different discussion in the United States. If Boston tried to do what Paris is doing and embracing, there'd be a new mayor, right? There'd probably be a new mayor before the election, because it's just a different world that we're dealing with, sadly, here in the United States when it comes to those kinds of policies. We were looking at revenue issues that are present at the federal level and at state levels, not municipal levels, because that's where most of the gas tax revenue is generated and then how it's being spent. Municipalities really don't have much of a role when it comes to either raising gas tax or spending gas tax. So it just wasn't really within the scope of our report.
Yeah, no, lots of commentary around the parking question and interest in, what's happening in Paris. I would point out that, it was one early on commentary was, look, we don't use gas taxes and tolls to fund highways and roads in India, in Colombia, right, in the Netherlands. So yes, in many ways, we're talking about something, that is different, the way that the funding system is set up here in the United States.
In the United States, I would say this. At the municipal level is where I believe most of the action will have to take place in terms of mode shifting people away from vehicle to transit and rail. That will require a lot of things to happen in convergence, right? Part of this will be investing in transit systems to make them more responsive to different journey patterns and different journey needs in the post-pandemic environment. Some of this will have to be, one of the things I like to just obvious point, urban streetscapes are finite public assets, and we're not sharing them. We're giving them over exclusively to automobility. Once at the urban level, we begin to do more sharing of that finite asset with protected cycling lanes, with protected dedicated bus lanes, then we'll be able to begin to have at the municipal level incentives for people to mode shift. You have to both change, I believe, the basic infrastructure of urban design. And at the same time, you have to provide people with viable alternatives, safe alternatives, whether it be transit, whether it be cycling, in that urban environment to generate that mode shift. More difficult question is how to do the same thing for outer suburbs that rely on inner city rail. Those will have different solutions associated with them, but we certainly have an opportunity to think about this funding issue in a much more strategic way than simply cash in and cash out. If all we think about is dollar for dollar replacement, we will miss the strategic opportunity to leverage this moment in a way that will fulfill many of the aspirations that I believe most of us share.
Jinwoo, I'll turn it back to you to close, but I mean, just to recognize that there was also commentary about sort of the weight of the vehicle. I think it's important that everyone leaves this conversation with a recognition that, yes, indeed, the wear and tear imposed on our roads increases exponentially according to the weight of the vehicle. And there's some very interesting policy considerations that are explored, I think, in the report that derive from that. So
we have a small section on weight, in the report where we actually look at the weight impact. And I mean, so people say it's fourth power, some people say it's power of 2. It's still up to discussion, but yeah, there definitely is a huge impact.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I really enjoyed the first presentation conversation. We'll share the report. Let's treat the report as a live document. So send us comments, and Jim, Bhuvan will try to absorb into this. Right. So let me finally, join me thank both Jim and Bhuvan for the research and presentation today. It's really helpful. Thank you so much. Yes. Right.
Thank you.
So quick advertisement for next week. We'll have Professor Alex Jaculet talk about demand responsive microtransit, both the demand, design, and operation. Thank you. See you guys next week.